Okay, so now we're live. This is Dr. Wilhelm Weber, who is you're the administrator for the Old Latin School in Wittenberg.
There you go. That's right. Yeah.
All right, and you'll notice that since you're German, or well, let's see, I forget. Are you from Germany or South Africa technically?
I'm a South African, born and bred South African. I'm now living in Germany because I've got a German wife.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And because you have a German name, we say your W's like V's in English, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little about a little bit more about yourself and where you're from, how you came to go from South Africa to Germany and so forth.
Well, that's a bit of a long story, but anyway, I'm a descendant of Lutheran missionaries. They went out to South Africa in about the same time as the forebears of the Missouri Synod under Walther went to St. Louis, sort of, or that old country down there. And so my people did not leave Germany because of political persecution, like the Saxons did, or because of religious persecution or something like that, but rather because of mission movement. They were children of a Lutheran revival. Together with Walther, there are three other very important Lutherans in Germany who sort of started a neo-Orthodox revival. One was Wilhelm Löhe down in Bavaria. The other one was Filmer in Hessen, which was a very academic and pastoral thing. And then there's one which is more of rural farmers, village church, Hermannsburg. And he starts something which we call a farmer's mission, Bauernmission. It means not only pastors are sent out, but rather whole communities to show the heathens practically how Christians live. So it's not just about preaching and conducting a service, but rather a whole way of life. You get the whole package. Now, the guy who led this was Louis Harms. Ludwig was his proper name, but everybody called him Louis. And he had a very strong brother too, Theodor, whom they used to call Theo. And he was they were very influential. And even today, if you go to Hermannsburg, you will find this town very much influenced by these missions. They have got mission stations all over the world, on every continent. This little village church started their Lutheran mission endeavors. The only place where they have stayed, it's the joke which still goes today, is the only place we have come to stay is the one where we never wanted to go, and that's South Africa. Because our people actually were on their way to Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was the goal. And just like, at that time in the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century, all of Africa was practically divided amongst the colonial powers.
Yeah, my students have seen the picture of like a cake or something and the Europeans sitting around a table and trying to divide it up.
There you go. And one of the places which were not Christianized was the backlands of Ethiopia, the highlands amongst the Omoro people. For the first time, they've now, Ethiopia to this time now has got a president of the Omoro people. But anyway, at that time, Louis Harms who was a bit of a romantic figure, said, we are going to the Moro people. They are the last heathens of Africa, because we, the Saxons of Germany, were the last Germans who were Christianized under Charles the Great, Charlemagne. And so this history sort of got him that he got a whole big ship to transport his farmers and people.
It is set up.
It's off.
It's off?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me help my son real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, it should start up any minute now, okay? I never thought I'd have to set up a video conference for my son in kindergarten. I'm sorry.
No problem at all.
Okay, so they're coming from, these guys from Germany, they have this idea, we're going to be missionaries, but we're going to set up not just a church, but we're going to bring a group of people so we can show the people, hey, this is how Christians live.
Yes, there you
And
go.
they're headed around Africa, from Germany, still around Africa, to Ethiopia, and somehow they get stopped in South Africa.
Yeah, they go past South Africa and they get to Dar es Salaam, but in Dar es Salaam is still they've got big Arab centers and Muslim chiefs, muftis and mullahs and stuff, and they don't let the Lutherans pass. And so despite a whole lot of diplomacy and a lot of money and stuff like that, it's to no avail, and they actually return. And that was something which they never bargained for, because Louis Harms also, that was one of his principles, said, we will never see you again, only in heaven. You are going to do your work. It's going to be a lifelong mission, because transcultural missions is really a lifelong endeavor, learning the language, doing everything. You must imagine these guys really took everything and they wanted to settle somewhere out in the sticks and do this new thing. It was very romantic also in some sense, but also a real faith mission. Now, on their way back, mission not accomplished, but mission failed. They come down to South Africa, where the Berlin mission guys say, you don't need to go back to Germany. There's enough work here. Come help us here. And that's how they got stuck in South Africa. That's why, as I said, that was the only place they didn't want to go, but that's where they stayed. Because now, looking back, 150 years later, you can see that Hermannsburg was in South America, they were in North America, they were in Australia, India, parts of other places in Asia, Ethiopia too, after 5 more failed trips. So only the 7th trip was a success, and they actually got it. But Louis Harms never saw that himself. It was like Moses, who never saw the promised land, but it was always, he did not feel like St. Paul, who said after 3 times asking, well, then God obviously doesn't want this. No, he was sure it would come one day. After he passed away, after his death, the Lutherans actually got there. And today, you know that Mekane Jesus is one of the biggest Lutheran churches on the continent. And the Hermannsburg people were very active there. It is one of the strange things in my life. I was a pastor in South Africa then, and now in the last years of my time, the Ethiopian Lutherans coming to South Africa in big numbers, financial migration because job opportunities and stuff, came to South Africa, and they actually applied with our church, the Lutheran Church in Southern Africa, whether they could have access to our churches. They commune or they do their services in Amharic. They don't do English, they don't do Zulu well or Setswana. So they had different church services, but they asked us to come into the churches and so on. And also at our seminary down in Pretoria, they actually attended classes which we offered for quite a number of them, because these migrants from Ethiopia were more than our whole church in numbers together. So in one shift, suddenly the Lutherans in South Africa more than doubled. And that is and that's for me one of the wonderful things, that 150 years after our people tried to get there and didn't come there successfully, the Ethiopians come and visit us successfully. And they actually are very happy down in South Africa and working very actively in strong mission church endeavors, which makes me very hopeful and very happy. And yes, I'm joyful about that.
So then you're a descendant from those missionaries who were trying to get to Ethiopia, ended up in South Africa.
Yes.
Okay.
One, the forebear, the first in my family's line is a guy called Friedrich Weber. His name is also already Wilhelm, etc. And so he was first, let me say he was part of that revival of Louis Harms, although he was from a reformed part in Germany. Germany is was all different little states at that time. Germany was not in existence in 1852, and he came from a little place called Lippe-Detmold. Because it was a Lutheran enclave in a reformed area, the people, his superiors, did not really register that. And so when he asked for that he wanted to work as a missionary, they sent him as a reformed.
Working.
They sent him as a missionary to Jakarta, Indonesia. And so that was very far away. And it was all amongst reformed people. We must also know at that time it was still very much denominational missions. And so he now, who had not been educated, the reformed people said, well, if you are an ardent believer, well, then you can go and do missions. After a few years, he returned to Germany and said, no, this is not for me. And his sister organized a place at the theological seminary or the school in Hermannsburg for him to be properly trained as a pastor. So he started again with a whole process of doing theology, and then was sent as a younger man to northern part of Zululand. Zululand was still at that time an intact kingdom. Shaka Zulu, the big film. And they were not interested at all in Christian missions. But the Lutherans had various mission stations around the place. And he got the most northern part at Emyati, which is today close to Nongoma, very rural Zululand, even today. And started to work there for about 20 years. Emyati is the place of the buffalo, and he got that place from a chief, who gave him permission to start a mission station over there. In the 20 years that he was there, he only baptized 2 people. And those 2 people were probably renegades and sort of misfits who ran away from the kingdom and the social structure. Well, they sought escape, and they were then baptized on this mission station. The Zulu Wars were at that time, Britain tried by all means to subjugate the Zulu kingdom, wipe it out. And so in those war times, those mission stations were burned down. My forebears had their place burned down 3 times. The wife of my forebear was quite well-to-do in Germany, and they always helped to rebuild it again. And so but still, if we know nowadays, they always say, if you burn down once, you guys in America probably say if a hurricane hits you, it's about as if you have moved 3 times or something like that. But now if you get burnt down 3 times, well, you've moved 10 times. So it was a restless life. He died of cancer, and it was very painful also. And it must have been quite a hard time for him. But if you think of that in the background, and then you listen to the stories of how today the Zulu kingdom is Christianized, they are more than 80% Christians. We've got big Lutheran mission station at Lomo. That's the place where he still went, and there's a big hospital there. There's a big active congregation there. He never got to see that, but we as the descendants can say, well, 150 years later, something really came of that. And that is something which I think is very important for the view of Christian missions, is that it takes time, and we don't often see the fruit in our lifetime, but God does his thing at the time. When I worked on these things, I also found that my forebear always tried to teach the Zulu people the Christian music. He loved songs and hymns of the Christian church, and so he taught them that. And they thought that was terribly funny. The way the Germans sing, and they were very much into stamping of feet. If they stamp the feet, you wake the spirits who live under the ground. And then so the music is always also very strongly religious in the sense of connecting us with the ancestors. And now the Lutherans didn't do anything of that. Never mind clapping of hands or anything like that. No stamping of feet. It was just a liturgical song. And so very strange, interactive culturally. But, and that's the, in my view, fascinating thing. Now, when I go at the university, we have a big concert every year which is offered by the rector and the principal of the university, and you have about 150 to 200 students singing in the choir. And this choir sang in that year a passage, one of big Philip Mendelssohn's Second Symphony of the Reformation, or of the printing press. Who's it called? What is the name of the guy with the printing press?
Gutenberg, yeah.
The Second Symphony, I think, is of Gutenberg, and so Mendelssohn adds a whole lot of hymns and psalms, etc., and these students all sing in German. Now I sit in the audience and I also watch this, thinking of my forebear 150 years ago, and then I see this big choir, and when he lived, they all still poked fun at him and thought, what a strange world and what an idiot from wherever. And now 150 years later, their descendants suddenly are all participating in singing these wonderful hymns and psalms. For instance, Watchman, when is the night over? Things like that. Or Allein Gott in der Höhe sei the one song which we used to sing in the old order of the service regularly. And so that kind of history shows you again that missions is not for spontaneous activity, but it is a long-term view. God planted his prophets many, many hundred years before Jesus came. And then Jesus came, and there were but 12 disciples. And now it has reached the ends of the world. But one last example of that time, and that'll be enough for this introductory stuff, is the one that the son of the chief who actually gave my forebear permission to start a mission station over there. He is now a professor of Lutheran theology in the Pietermaritzburg University. And he actually teaches Lutheran systematics. Now, that again is a thing which his forebear would never have dreamt of. They never converted. On the contrary, he was one of those guys who were killed by Shaka because they did not punish the missionaries strong enough, and they gave land, etc., etc. And so, but his descendant now is a Lutheran professor in there, and he did his studies also in Hermannsburg. He worked. He talks German fluently, and he's now also as many generations back as I am, and still that is how the little seed, which is as small as a mustard seed, grows into a big tree, and the birds of the sky come and nest under it. And so that is one of the encouraging things of that time and age. He was the forebear, his children. Now, he died of cancer, and then he died in the 1880s, and all his children became farmers. They left Zululand and lived on the border in what we know as the Transvaal. It's one of the 4 provinces of the Union of South Africa. And now in they did not become pastors or missionaries because the widow then, she said, no, the mission doesn't take care of its people. The burning and stuff like that and stuff. But my grandfather, the son of one of these farmer kids, he then again became a missionary. My father was a missionary, and I also wanted to go into missions, but I got a call into the German Lutheran Church down in South Africa, and that's where I went. So, long story short, we are a family of missionaries, and that has the church is independent since 1967 now. It does. I worked there as well as a pastor, and 3 years ago, I started working over here. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Let's get to some questions from the students.
Sure.
All right. So Dominic wants to know what you are a doctor of.
Theology.
Theology.
I studied. I wanted to do I was a parish pastor, and I always thought that it is good to continue with the study of theology, although it was not very necessary, but I always wanted to continue my studies, not to become a professor or something, but just to stay in the way of thinking and reading and writing and stuff like that. Yes. And then I did missiology. I wanted to do missiology with David Bosch. David Bosch, let me show you one of those things which he wrote. That is typical. I can't find it so quickly. He wrote the book Transforming Missions. And he was a a world famous theologian, very active in the World Council of Churches and very active all over in missions. But in that year, 1992, when I wanted to start, I came down to South Africa, finished my vicarage, and I wanted to enroll. He died on the way to some funeral where he was to conduct the service, and he died in the car crash. And so that stopped, and I did my theology then with Professor Adrio König, who was the head of the systematics department. Now that's a completely different thing to missiology, but I did it in, he was very gracious and he was very helpful, and I worked on the different mission programs of the established churches. That means not just individual people, but rather of the churches. That means I studied what does the mission theology of the Roman Catholic Church look like. So I studied Vatican II, Lumen Gentium, etc. And then I did the mission theology of the World Council of Churches. And now these big church bodies also have a sort of smaller opposites, like the Lausanne movement for the World Council of Churches. The Lausanne movement always said the World Council of Churches is too much busy with works of mercy, etc., and they should concentrate on the evangelism part. And so I did the Lausanne movement as well. And I did the LWF mission work, and then our confessional point of view as described most best in Professor Detlef Schulz's work from Fort Wayne. He has put that together, but that was after my time and after I finished.
Here's a question from Chance.
Yes.
How has the COVID-19 virus affected your country the most?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Chance. Now here in Germany, you know, we have been very fortunate. Italy, a big catastrophe started, and so we panicked and everything closed down. Our whole economy has come to a standstill. Slowly now, however, things are opening up again. My wife is a teacher and she's back at school. My son is doing a training program in Leipzig. Today he stopped doing from home, working online, and he's back in Leipzig doing his work. So things are slowly getting back. But if you ask how is it going in South Africa, there they still have got very, very strict controls. They have forbidden smoking. They have forbidden all sales of alcohol. The Americans know about that kind of story, and we don't know really why they do these strict rules, but it is very strict lockdown. So everybody is just allowed to leave the house between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning. That's a crazy number too, because everybody then concentrated at that time. So there are a lot of questions also, why do they do these kind of arbitrary things? But you ask, how does it affect? It looks as if South Africa is still going to some very deep water. You have got very poor people in South Africa. And the problem is not so much dying of COVID-19, but rather of hunger, because the people just don't have food and they don't have enough space. And it is really a big challenge. And they are only going into winter now. We are going to summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, in South Africa, which is south of the equator. The winter is now slowly starting to affect the people, and the cold, of course, makes people more susceptible to the flu and other viruses, like COVID as well.
Yeah.
So the dangerous time is only coming.
Okay. Dominic wants to know, what are the famous landmarks in Germany and South Africa?
Yeah, great question. Well, Germany, you have a whole lot of them. Only here in Wittenberg, we've got one of the place where I now work is where Luther worked 500 years ago. So in this little town, it's not a big town, and also in that time it was really on the edges, and you could ask, like they asked, the disciples asked about Jesus, what good can come of Bethlehem? So you could also ask what good could happen of Wittenberg. But in Wittenberg they've got 4 cultural heritage sites. So there's the big church where Luther did all the preaching. There's the castle church, which was actually the university center. You have got Luther's home, the big black cloister, and you've got Melanchthon's 4 UNESCO World Heritage Sites just in this little town. But every town here has got a castle, has got a church. There are many, many beautiful landmarks. Neuschwanstein is a very typical place down in the Alps, fairy tale castle. You've got Berlin, where you've got Checkpoint Charlie, where Germany was divided, things like that. So you have in Germany, you just have such an old culture. Many of the places are 1,000 years old, 500 years older than Columbus reached America, etc., etc. And so there's just so much history, so much to see, so much to enjoy as well. South Africa is more of a modern country. You will say there are more natural sites, like the big mountain range. You got big mountain ranges in the States, of course, the Rocky Mountains, etc., and the Appalachians. We've got the Drakensberg, Ukahlamba in Zulu, and that's the mountain kingdom of Lesotho. Right in the middle, you have in South Africa, you've got deserts, you've got jungle, you've got a world in one country. So you've got places where you've got winter rain season, you've got areas where you've got summer rain season. It's so big, just like the United States, a big place. South Africa is not quite as big, but you have also very different kinds of landmarks. You might want to look at the Voortrekker Monument, which is a very famous landmark. There are other places too, like the Union Buildings, which was one of the biggest sandstone buildings in the Southern Hemisphere. We've got the biggest Buddhist temple in the Southern Hemisphere in South Africa too. So it's very diverse, it's very pretty, and it's a very welcoming country too. It's a great tourist destination. But now under lockdown, no traveling.
Yeah. Now, let's see. So you're in Wittenberg. And so which of the churches was the one where Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door?
Yeah, that was the Castle Church.
The Castle Church.
If we say Castle Church, of course, it's actually quite a misnomer, really, because it was the castle and the university had its big functions there. So even if today, if you go into the church, it's not much of a church, it's more of a place where you've got all the heraldic of the big national noble shields and stuff like that. What do you call it? It is
the coat of arms and stuff.
Yeah, coat of arms. That's the right word. Yes. So it's more like a historical museum. But the real church where he preached is St. Mary's. That's the church I see when I look out of this door, and that is where you have the wonderful Reformation altar. You have got the old baptismal font. You've got very lots of art by Lukas Cranach, and which is where it really started, because that's where Luther was sitting and taking confession. And the people were not willing to really repent, because they said, well, I've paid for my remission already. Just give me the remission.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from Lauren. What are some traditions in South Africa, especially ones that would be different than what we have in America?
Yeah, that's a good question too. You see, one of the big things in South Africa is that we've got 11 official languages, for instance. And that's not even including German, not including Portuguese or Greek or something. We've got English, we've got Afrikaans, we've got Zulu, Setswana, Sotho, Venda. Those are all different kinds of languages, and all official business has to be done in all of those languages. That means you've got universities in those languages, and you've got it's quite a big difference to the United States, where you've got English and that's it.
Yeah.
Although people talk Spanish and they talk German and what have you, but everybody can communicate in English. The present government, which is the ANC government, democratically elected, they work very hard at getting English as the most spoken language. But at present, it is only the fourth most spoken language. The most spoken is Zulu, the language of Shaka Zulu. The second language is Xhosa. And the third one is Afrikaans. And then only we get English. Afrikaans is really a South African language. It's a modern language. It was developed by people who had come to South Africa from all over the place. Also Africans themselves, Malayan slaves. Nobody from South Africa itself was ever allowed to be made a slave. I don't know how that is in America, whether the Indians were actually made as slaves or you just had Africans. I don't know about that. But in South Africa, no South African was allowed to be made a slave. So they imported slaves from Malaysia or from Indonesia and those places, and Malagasy, and they were brought in and they all started talking Afrikaans. And so that is why today it is not a white man's language. It is spoken by most what we call coloreds, or that is people of mixed backgrounds. And that's how they call them in South Africa. And we had a very strong racial segregated population until the 1994. And that is very different to the United States, but I think, and that is something which is very strange, and I don't know how we'll get across, but I always thought that the relations amongst the races was better in South Africa than in the United States even. When I got to the United States, I often felt a bit more bitterness on that side if I landed in Chicago or in New York or wherever. But in South Africa, I have never felt afraid anywhere. I was a pastor amongst Zulu people and Setswana people, and so I grew up in a typical black mission area, and so I also speak that language, and therefore I feel very much at home there. There's a good relation amongst the people. The traditions are also that much of the food is different, I would say, than in the States. Although we also have hamburgers and chips, we have KFC, we have McDonald's. Most of our people do own cooking and eat corn as a staple food, but meat was one of the favorite diets, especially of the African people. They will eat goats, they will eat cattle, if there's a big thing, but also chicken, of course.
Speaking of different languages, Gideon wants to know, what's your native language? And then also, how many languages do you speak?
I speak German. My mother tongue is German. And I am not, at school we learned English in the second year, and then Afrikaans in the fourth year. So in my school years, I always had those three languages to go along. Zulu and Setswana I picked up on the way. When I was a small child, my father was a missionary amongst Setswana people, and I could talk it. But then we left that area, and I forgot it, and so that's where I'm stuck today. I can't talk it anymore. But the other languages which I learned as a pastor, I can't talk. That's Latin and Greek and Hebrew. I struggle to read it, but that's I get by. Yes.
All right. Amanda has a question. Are sports a big pastime there?
Yeah, very much so. South Africa is sports crazy, nearly like the United States. We have rugby, cricket, athletics, of course. Soccer is coming on now. It's seasonal sports. In summer, we play cricket. In winter, we play rugby. Athletics is the same time as the cricket. And then girls play hockey, and all of us do swimming, etc. Here in Germany, it is more on a private basis or socialized club basis. So if the soccer is a big thing, athletics too, but also handball, things like that. We don't have American sports. I know sometimes at school we used to play a bit of softball or something like that, which is nearly like baseball, but not half. Our netball, which the girls play, is not like basketball, but it still has 2 hoops or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And so there was never a great interaction. We don't have ice hockey, only, yeah.
All right, and you mentioned the girls play hockey. You're talking about like field hockey, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Let's see. Then, let's see. What are the different religions that you see in probably both countries?
Yeah, in South Africa, you have more than 80% were actually Christians already. But President Mbeki, who was after Mandela, he started something which we call African Renaissance. And that means that Africa has to return to its roots. And part of that was part to ancestral veneration. And this is really catastrophic, because it's actually going backwards in history. Because now no longer Jesus Christ is seen as the savior, but some African way of life. That is something which, of course, is shows that it always was still under the, and it's also a political issue, of course, to try and push Christianity as a white man's religion,
Yeah.
which has never been. Also, Jesus is no European. He fled to Africa. An African carried his cross. We could go on like that. Philip goes and baptizes a treasurer from Candace, from Ethiopia, etc., etc., etc. And so even in historically, Africa was one of the places where the Christian religion spread out very strongly in the early centuries. Richard Jenkins has written quite a bit, Philip Jenkins, sorry, has written quite a bit about that, how North Africa was very much Christianized. Our big church father, St. Augustine, was an African. And so, and others as well. Alexandria was a big center of the Christian church. And that changed with the impact of Islam. Islam overrode those areas, and it was even at that time a bit of political emancipation from Greece, where the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman churches, they were very much seen as foreign forces. And so Islam was sort of like seen as a emancipation from this political subjugation. So when African independence came, the people went to Islam. Now, Islam is also quite strong in South Africa politically, but not numerically, because we are just so overwhelmingly Christian, really. Even we talk about the United States as a Christian nation. Well, South Africa is like that as well. It was a favorite of Christian missions many, many years. And we have, as I say, about 80% of people are there. But the traditional religions are coming into the foreground. Not just Islam, but Hinduism. You perhaps know the name Mahatma Gandhi from India. For a time, he lived in South Africa as a lawyer. And we've got the biggest Indian population outside of India lives in South Africa. And those people are very religious, Muslim, economic-wise very strong, second-generation Indians. The first generation was Hindu, poor slaves taken into the sugarcane fields as farmers on the sugarcane, helpers on the sugarcane farms. And so that was those religions are still there, and now the old ancestor venerations, which we would call in theological terms animism, because that it is it's not really high religion in the sense of one God, but everything is somehow got a religious connotation.
All right, now let's see. We got about 10 or so minutes left. All right, I'll try to hit a few questions quickly. These are both about holidays. Amanda wants to know what Christmas is like in Germany.
Oh, it's wonderful, just beautiful. We don't have as much snow as we would like to have.
Uh-huh.
But on Christmas, the churches are full. It's one of those things where most people or many people still go to church. But it is a very big family time. Christmas is beautiful in Germany with the music and the Christmas markets and the food and the sweets and the cake, and it's holiday, and it is just wonderful.
All right, then Lauren wants to know, what are some different holidays that Africa has that are different from the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, for a great part, our holidays were also determined by the church calendar, Christmas, Easter, etc. So I presume those are similar to the ones in the United States. But since the change to democracy, we also have things like Youth Day, Women's Day, Labor Day, all these kind of things. I don't know how far you have those, but so you have all sorts of holidays. We have, of course, a Pride Day, which was previously sort of like a national holiday where people used to come together. It's called, first of all, a Heritage Day, where all the different groups celebrate their different heritages and traditions. And that today they say, well, that's just a day to go outside and have a barbecue and just enjoy the sun and the blue skies and the lovely atmosphere together with all the South African people.
All right, and then Dade wants to know, what are the main differences of Germany and South Africa?
Yeah. English, I presume. South Africa is more of a reformed country. Germany is more of a Lutheran and Catholic country, so it's more traditional. I think that is something we have got. Otherwise, the one is in the southern hemisphere, the other one is in the north. I presume it is about like if you compare Wisconsin with Florida or something, or California and Michigan, perhaps. I don't know, but those are sort of like differences.
Okay.
Where are you guys?
We're in Illinois. Um,
In the middle.
so we're about an hour northeast of St. Louis.
Okay. Nice.
Let's see. Lauren wants to know as well, what's the food like? If you could have one dish in South Africa and one dish in Germany, what would be the best food that you would recommend?
Oh, we are spoiled for choice, and I think it's like, and I must tell you as well that I always think that Americans eat wonderfully. You have got wonderful menus. You have got such a variety, from seafood to wonderful pork to wonderful steaks, etc. You guys eat wonderfully fresh vegetables, etc., etc. I think we in South Africa are probably a bit more Asian-like. You have Mexican food, you have got Asian as well, but ours is more to Indonesia and Malaysia, because that's where our slaves came from, who then were working in the kitchen, and that influenced our diet a bit. But today it is sort of like always meat was a big thing. We like barbecues, but I think Americans know all about that themselves. And in Germany, it is not so. Whereas in South Africa, you'd eat a nice piece of steak or the hamburger or something like that. Here in Germany, most of the meat is refined, made into sausages or something like that. So to go further, bacon is cured, etc., etc. So it is more, let me say, a refined kitchen here in Germany. Whereas in South Africa, we just were spoiled for fresh produce, and so you didn't have these fancy ways of treating it. So but then it's also economic issue. Poor people eat what we would call chicken feet and chicken heads. That's cheap food, or the head of a cow, which is at the slaughterhouse. It's not very expensive meat. You can buy the whole head, and it goes for pretty cheap. Or the insides, the inners, things like that. It's always an economic question too. But I think you guys in the States, you know about good food. And
Now, I'm surprised none of the questions have come up about this, but you're from Africa, and South Africa is known for, at least when my brother Jacob was there, he came back talking about the awesome game parks you have there. What's the wildlife like in South Africa, and do you have any good stories with that?
Yeah, when I love the bush. I love outdoor life, just like Americans do too. You guys, but they always say there's a way of saying that Africa is not for sissies. But that is just not true. Living in Africa is easy in comparison with living in America. America is much more dangerous. Your grizzly or whatever is much bigger than any of our animals. And you've got poisonous spiders, poison ivy, and all these terrible things.
Dad,
And it is so frightfully cold.
can you get him on there holding both?
Whereas we in South Africa, the temperatures are always mild, the sun is always shining, even in winter, and so it is really easy living. Whereas in America, it's just tough. Now, that also goes for the diversity. I went up in the Rocky Mountains once. I stayed up there a whole day, and we wanted to look for elk. And I was just lying there, and I nearly froze to death. Another thing. But I didn't see much the whole day. I heard about 3 or 4 birds the whole day. That was about it. But in South Africa, it just does not work that way. It is, there's just so much wildlife all around. Bird life, small game, but also big game. So if you go to the big parks, man, elephants, giraffe, buffalo, all sorts of things which you can see on YouTube, which is just wonderful. I love that. Here in Germany, I also did my hunting license, so I did training, and we stay up nearly all night waiting for boar, and there's many a night when I just come home and all I saw was one hare or listened to one owl or something like that. So the difference to Africa is just the huge number of animals. There is just so much to see.
All right. This will be this will be the last question from the students then today. Bill wants to know, how advanced is South Africa? I guess he's probably thinking like technologically.
Yeah. You know, we had first-class medicine, first-class academics as well. We've got, it's very similar in certain ways to America. And I'm sure that people, when they land in South Africa, are first surprised. We've got big highways, etc., etc. Our economy was good because we had gold, we had diamonds, we had a lot of these kind of minerals which we could mine. We did not have to be very clever. We just had to take it out of the ground. But it is like oil. And if the oil is finished, well, then you are stuck with what you have done with that. And that is where we are now in South Africa. I think a lot of the first heart transplant was made in South Africa. Chris Barnard in Groote Schuur Hospital, for instance. So the thing is now, with the change to democracy, things are popularized, and it is not so much an elite effort anymore. I think we should see that in the time when I grew up in South Africa, was much promotion of one small group, and whereas a huge part of the society was actually largely ignored. And nowadays it is democratic, and the whole system is, and that's why also we no longer have these first class things, but all is more of a third class. And that is not, I'm not putting it down, but I'm just describing the situation, which actually shows that our schooling, whereas previously you had very good elite schools for the white people and poor schools for the black people, now the private schools are very expensive and still at a very high standard, but most government schools are coming down in standards. And that is just how it is a way. I think it is the old way where you say in capitalism you work that a few had the chance to make it, and now everybody is just poor or something like that. I know it is a stupid way of putting it, but I think it goes a long way to explain where we are going at the moment. This COVID-19 thing is also affecting poor people very strongly, and I don't know how South Africa will recover economically, because they already are struggling to keep the lights on, the electricity, etc., etc. And so I think you need to pray for South Africa very much. Yes.
That was actually my last question. As we keep both Germany and South Africa in our prayers, in South Africa, the COVID-19 and the economic impact of that sounds like one of the big things to keep in our prayers. In Germany, what's something that we should keep in our prayers?
The people don't go to church. Whereas in South Africa, we have got a population of about 80%. I walk with a collar, and people would be greeting me on the street and say, "Pastor, pray for me," etc. Here in Germany, not even 10% of the society goes to church. So if you want to pray for Germany, you must pray for a revival and that the people hear the gospel again, that they get to know Jesus Christ. Here, too many people just get by without Jesus. And there's nothing worse than that. Even if people die in South Africa, at least they all hope that God is in control, and they all are faithful that God holds the whole world in their hands. Here in Germany, there's no faith like that.
Well, Dr. Weber, we thank you so much for your time. We thank you for the awesome history and stories that you have for us. And just thank you again so much for being generous with your time and answering the questions from students in America.
Paul, it was a great pleasure for me. Thank you for your interest. And I am so glad to meet Jacob's brother again, even if it is only online. Thank you very much. And
all right, very good.
Coming to your family was one of the highlights. It was like coming home. It was such friendly people, such faithful people. I really praise God for people like you, like your father and your uncles. Thank you very much for doing what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. My dad sends along his greetings. And I didn't tell this when we first met was you came you spent the day talking at my high school, and then you stayed the night at my house. And it was awesome spending the day with you all the way back then. Thank you again, Dr. Weber.
Thank you very much for catching up, and greet your father, Tim, and your mother, Dawn. Give them all my best. Thank you.
Will do. All right, we'll have the broadcast right here.